Funding for New Mexico in Focus is provided by viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, we dig into how Project 2025 could impact the lives of New Mexicans if former President Trump is reelected in November. And
I love this community so deeply. I do not want people to move out. I want them to be able to stay and know they have a future in northern New Mexico.
Running for a third term, we continue our 2024 election interviews with Congresswoman Teresa Leger Fernandez in a candidate conversation about reproductive health and the economy. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm senior producer Lou DeVizio. With less than 2 weeks until the general election, we return to our candidate conversations with politics correspondent Gwyneth Doland. Tonight, Gwyneth sits down with Representative Teresa Leger Fernandez, who's running for a third two-year term representing New Mexico's 3rd Congressional District. Coming up in less than 10 minutes, Gwyneth asks the Congresswoman how her work in D.C. has addressed the unique economic needs of her community, a district that includes some of the richest and poorest parts of our state. But before that, we're going to spend some time looking at a policy platform that's become a bit of a boogeyman, Project 2025. Mention it to Democrats, and you're likely to hear apocalyptic prognostications presented as near certainties if Donald Trump were to be elected. Ask a Republican about it, and you'll probably catch some bluster about media fear-mongering and that Project 2025 isn't Trump's actual platform. Now, we want to understand where the truth is, so we contacted the Republican Party of New Mexico and invited them to send someone to help us understand their presidential nominee's agenda, how it would impact New Mexicans, and where it differs from Project 2025. They objected, citing the framing of our discussion and the mention of Project 2025, and sent me a document called Agenda 47. That's what the party says is the true Trump platform. Now, I went through Agenda 47 and found the policy stances to be largely rhetorical. No numbers or figures, no substantive policy analysis of any kind. So our question remains, how should New Mexicans interpret the ambiguity at the top of the Republican ticket? Here to discuss that with executive producer Jeff Proctor, our political psychologist and author Martha Burke, and Democratic former state senator Dee Dee Feldman. Here's Jeff.
Martha Burke, Dee Dee Feldman, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. We wanted to start off covering the basics of this. I feel like for a lot of folks, Project 2025 has been reduced to a yard sign or a social media hashtag. So what is Project 2025? Who wrote it, and why is it so controversial? Martha, let's start with you.
Well, who wrote it? The Heritage Foundation, one of the oldest and more vicious so-called think tanks in the country, very conservative. They basically, in my view, this latest Project 2025 is their manifesto. It is, by the way, populated by many people that were in the Trump administration are now in Heritage. And I have to say as an aside that 2/3 of them are men, about 1/3 are women. They have fewer women. But it is a manifesto to dismantle the government, basically. They want to do away with any guardrails. They want to basically install the president as a dictator, with their help, of course, because depending on who is in that chair, they might need a lot of help intellectually.
You know, one of the things that I read about it, even before I read the document itself, was that the last time a conservative administration, namely the Trump administration, came into power, they didn't have knowledge of the bureaucracy. They didn't have their people in the Justice Department or in any of the key posts. They were kind of at a loss as to how to run the government and put their program into action. So this document, Project 2025, was deemed as sort of a recruiting tool and a transition tool, so that that Trump would have a operating manual once he got into power, and wouldn't just be playing things off the cuff.
And so that we're clear, I want to just pick up on something that Martha said. Of the authors of Project 2025, 6 of them are former Trump staffers, 150 former Trump staffers are mentioned in the document. So interestingly, in the last handful of weeks in particular, Trump's been all over the place on this. One moment he's like, that thing looks great. And then if he's sitting down for an interview, he's like, I don't know who did that. You know, it's kind of like the kid who spills the milk on the carpet and then runs away and says, I don't know who did that. And just in the last week, they've said, we want to create a situation where none of these Project 2025 folks would be in our administration. Dee Dee, why would Trump want to run away from a document like this?
Well, he's getting flack for it because people are reading it. People are realizing that this is a doomsday scenario for the United States in terms of all kinds of policies. You know, Trump has his rallies, and at his rallies, he advocates all of the policies that are in 2025, and then the Project 2025 is the chapter and verse for his rallies as to how to, deport millions of people who are here illegally, allegedly. And how to dismantle the EPA, how to drill, baby, drill. Project 2025 doesn't have all the exclamation points and language like magnificent and the best, but it fills in the blanks as to Trump's declarations at his rallies.
Is it a little bit of a quiet part out loud thing, Martha?
Well, I think it is because he's only disavowing it until he gets elected. And then he's going to probably embrace it. I mean, he's already doing that, as Dee Dee said, but it's in a little bit different way. He's trying to support the ideas without saying that he really is on board with these people. He's saying he doesn't even know these people.
Totally.
Some of them were in his administration.
Peter Navarro.
Yeah, he doesn't know them.
Ben Carson.
It's a typical Trump thing. He's got to have it one way, and different audience to have it another way. It's okay to lie, he's done it all his life. And I think it's clear that he would go along with, they wrote it for him.
I want to stick with you for just a second. The official title of this document is Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise. It's not unlike the Heritage Foundation to cook up documents like this. Why do you think there's been so much concern and heat this time around?
Well, I think the concern is that they're all people that are very close to Trump. If he wins, he's going to march to their tune if he's still sane, which is a question in my mind right now. But it's much more blatant than anything they have put on paper before. They've always had sort of the pseudo-intellectual conservatism in their policies. Now, no, we're going to dismantle the Department of Education. We're going to totally outlaw abortion. And on down the list. So it's much more raw, if you will, and I guess that's so Trump can understand it. I don't know.
It's a 960-page document.
Yeah.
And keep in mind that in 2020, when Trump ran before, there was no platform even. And the platform that exists this time is pretty sketchy. There's really no there. Yeah. It's all generalities, and it's much more like a Trump rally than this. So for a long time, there was nothing out there but Project 2025. And so people were actually reading it to find out the stance of the Republican Party and of Trump on many of these issues, because there was no other place to find out.
Yeah. I've got a couple of minutes left in this segment, and I want to pick up on something you just said. So we invited the New Mexico GOP to send someone to participate in this conversation we're having today. They declined, citing the framing of this discussion that we're having. They also sent us a copy of something called Agenda 47 and said it was Trump's true platform. We looked through that 16-page document and found it to be pretty hollow. No numbers, no data, no real political stances, mainly rhetorical. Should the American people believe that that's the plan or that Project 2025 is the plan?
Well, Project 2025 is the meat and potatoes of the very sketchy document that is now being used as the platform. And if you actually look at them back to back, and I did do that, you find that basically they are the same, except the platform doesn't go into detail, but Project 2025 does go into detail. And that's why I think the Republican Party is a little afraid of people reading what's in there. They'd rather just go with the rhetoric. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
It's kind of a hand in glove situation, right? Where the undefined portions of the platform are defined in this other space.
It's pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Well said, Martha. That's where we're gonna leave the first part of the discussion. We'll be back to talk a little bit about specifics and how this is going to impact our state if we see it happen.
There is a tremendous economic impact from Dreamers, and also from maybe the 60,000 or so undocumented workers here in New Mexico. So there are a lot of these folks in New Mexico. They're contributing to the economy, and so hearing that rhetoric, I think, just strikes fear into their hearts.
We'll return to Jeff's conversation with Dede Feldman and Martha Burke in a little less than 20 minutes. Last December, the New Mexico Supreme Court ruled the updated districts drawn by state lawmakers in 2021 did not qualify as egregious gerrymandering. This fall marks the first presidential election since that redistricting case, and the second for our congressional representatives. As politics correspondent Gwyneth Doland points out in our next candidate conversation, Representative Teresa Leger Fernandez is running for a third term in a district with a large number of Republicans. During their conversation, the Congresswoman tells us why she would best represent the district that now boasts the diversity of established conservative communities like Clovis and liberal strongholds like Santa Fe.
Congresswoman Leger Fernandez, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Gwyneth, and thank you to everybody who is listening tonight.
I'm going to start with the economy. Your enormous district includes both the richest and poorest parts of the state, from Los Alamos and Santa Fe to Crown Point, Tucumcari. Let me ask you, what are you doing in Congress to give all New Mexicans the opportunity to improve their financial situation and their quality of life?
So I love the fact that you highlighted how beautifully diverse my district is. I always start with, I'm Congresswoman Teresa Leger Fernandez, representing the beautiful and beautifully diverse 3rd Congressional District, because it is, and it is diverse both in socioeconomic and economic opportunities. And, about 20% of my district is Native American. I have ranchers. I, have the labs. I have a great diversity in every way imaginable, right? And each of those areas contributes to the economy of New Mexico in important ways. And what we've done, especially during my first term in Congress, was recognize that we need to invest in our communities in order to make them stronger economically. So what did we do? The bipartisan infrastructure law has brought billions into my district to make sure that we have the water that is essential. You cannot build any kind of business or have any kind of home if you don't have that water flowing. When the water flows, New Mexico grows. We made sure we had roads and broadband. I am a co-chair of the Rural Broadband Task Force. I have been laser focused in making sure that we bring broadband all over New Mexico, especially our rural areas. We've got over $1 billion of broadband. But then we need to make sure we support our agricultural areas. I have several bipartisan pieces of legislation to support local agriculture, looking at our arid landscape and investing in the kind of water conservation techniques, making sure our ranchers have the support they need, our farmers have the support, that we're supporting our nutrition programs. I've been looking at how do we also then invest in our education systems. Because if we're not growing, investing in what we believe in, which is our students, we are not going to have the workforce of tomorrow. So
Let me keep you back from education about financial, about the opportunity for prosperity specifically.
the opportunity for prosperity. So the basic infrastructure is there, right? And when we look at the Inflation Reduction Act, right, we passed a bill that actually has generated about 8.3 billion with a B worth of private investment in New Mexico. It's included manufacturing, wind turbines, solar manufacturing, and then solar installation. That's one area of economic development. I have a bill for the creative industry, investment in the creative industry. That's one of the pieces. I often talk about the enchanted innovation economy. New Mexico is the land of enchantment, but we also can create that innovation economy that will help us diversify as we move away from fossil fuels, as we have that transition.
I'm going to come back to the economy several times here. Let me give you one kind of specific example. The Calf Canyon Hermit's Peak fire was the largest and most destructive fire in New Mexico's history, and it means that a big part of northern New Mexico just is not going to be able to fully recover in our lifetimes. What is the economic and cultural future for those communities impacted by that fire?
That fire and the fact that it was so destructive and cost so many people their lives and livelihood and ancestral heritage, right? We need to recognize that it had all of those impacts, which was why it was so important for me to hold the federal government accountable and bring in $3.95 billion to help compensate them so that they can get compensated while those forests regrow, so that they can sell their Christmas trees, sell, their wood products, and perhaps look at other kinds of economic development in the meantime. So that $3.95 billion is going to go to reconstruction of homes. It's going to go to help business people look at new opportunities, and we have ranchers and farmers utilizing the money already. It's not going out fast enough, which is why I've been holding them accountable. We are also holding next week, we'll be having a financial planning session so that people who are receiving that kind of compensation can start thinking about what's the next step. I have been at the forefront of galvanizing what I call like a phoenix, rising from the ashes, where I'm creating a resource hub, so that people can go and get more information about how to build those businesses, bringing in the Small Business Administration. I required that the Small Business Administration now be teaming up with FEMA. So I'm very concerned about that, because I do not want, this is my home, right? This is where I grew up and where I rode horses, and I love this community so deeply. I do not want people to move out. I want them to be able to stay and know they have a future in northern New Mexico.
I want to think about the Republicans who are sort of new to this district. There's been a lot of changes here, and you now represent a lot of Republicans who were furious about the way that this was redrawn and redistricting. They say that Democrats deliberately disenfranchised voters in Clovis and Portales, Roswell, Artesia, Hobbs. All of these are in your district now. Why should you be the person to represent these conservative communities?
I did not control the redistricting, but what I do love is my district. And I show up in my district. I will be going back down to Roswell because they're doing really interesting things at the airport there. I will be taking one of those big, beautiful checks where we're able to support a few projects directly, federally directed funding. I call it community supported funding, because we have these amazing projects that come up, and I'll be taking these big checks to say, here's ways in which I've helped your senior center, the ways in which I've helped your infrastructure. Roswell has one of the best CASA, court-appointed advocates for the children that have been abused by the system. I am helping them grow that system. So all over my district, I often get told, you show up more than anybody I've ever known. And so whether or not I You know, whatever happened, I represent this district. I love representing the district. I am a daughter of rural New Mexico. And these are rural areas, so I understand the struggles. I understand the connection to the land. I understand those issues well, and I take those voices back to DC, and I work in an amazing bipartisan manner on these issues.
But let me point out one area where there's an ideological disconnect, and it's abortion, right? Lots of folks in this district, places like Clovis, Eunice, Hobbs, Roosevelt, and Lee counties, a lot of those people don't support abortion rights the way you do, and politicians there pass these ordinances trying to keep out abortion clinics. Why should these communities have abortion clinics or access when they fought so hard not to?
I am really happy that New Mexico understands the importance of freedom and understands the importance of a woman's freedom to make these personal decisions without the interference of politicians or government, because it's a conversation you should be having with your doctor, your own faith, and your familia. And when we talk about abortion restrictions in those states that have implemented abortion restrictions, women are dying from pregnancy complications. Gwyneth, let me tell you a story. Nearby, in one of the hospitals nearby, I was pregnant and I was on an operating table. I was losing so much blood that I could hear the doctor saying, "We're going to lose her. We're going to lose her." They had to worry about my life and whether they'd save me, but they didn't have to worry about whether they would be criminally prosecuted for carrying out my decision of what to do during that pregnancy. And that's the key difference that I think people are beginning to understand in New Mexico, in this country, that when you restrict a woman's freedom to make decisions about her own reproductive health, you're restricting her decisions to make about abortion, about contraceptions, about IVF, but also about saving her own life when a pregnancy goes wrong. And that, I think, is starting to set in, that you are respecting women on all those complex decisions. And so I think that I am very pleased that New Mexico has that. And I know that people might have different positions on that. But I think that it's important to recognize that these decisions are medical decisions that are best left to the freedom of the woman to have, because there are ramifications that come from it.
I want to keep thinking for a minute about these voters in that southernmost part of this district now. And a lot of the conversations that we have about immigration, people are bringing up cartels and fentanyl and drugs coming across the border. But I want to think about the economy for a minute. You know, the argument that we often hear is that immigrants are taking jobs, taking New Mexicans' jobs. But when you think about your district, from, say, Hobbs to Santa Fe, how would you describe the impact of immigration on New Mexico?
We know, I think, from a personal level as New Mexicans, because we all know somebody who's an immigrant, but also statistically, we know that immigrants work hard, they pay their taxes, and they work hard at jobs that we often have perhaps shortages. And so we need them. And so I speak to agricultural ranchers and farmers in the southern part of my district. They want us to fix the broken immigration system because they want to be able to have access, legal pathways for immigrants to be able to work in the agricultural industry, to be able to work in the oil and gas industry. They want to be able to have legal pathways for our dreamers who came here so young, right, and need to have a legal pathway for hardworking immigrants, law-abiding, to be able to have that. But the immigration system is broken, and we need bipartisan commitment to fix it. And we need to recognize that fentanyl is brought into this country. Actually, there's some great studies, including from like the Cato Institute, which is a right-wing conservative think tank, that says it's not immigrants who are bringing in fentanyl, it's citizens, and it's coming through at our ports of entry. So we need legislation to cut it off at our ports. We need to invest in the technology that we need at our ports of entry, that we need along our borders, so that we can keep out fentanyl that China is sending over, right? And keep out criminals. But at the same time, recognize the value that immigrants bring to our economy, and it's like about a $1.7 trillion economic benefit, right? They pay taxes, they're important, and when we think about those aspects and do not demonize the problem, and do not demonize and use immigrants to divide and to tell lies about their communities, which is what we're hearing from the Republican presidential candidates. They're telling lies about these immigrant communities and demonizing them, rather than saying, okay, this is an issue we need to fix. How do we work in a bipartisan manner to fix it? Because it's good for the economy, it's good for New Mexico, and it's good for, I think, our values of humanity to actually fix this issue.
Switching topics just a little bit here, there's a lot of conversation here in New Mexico and nationally now about missing and murdered Indigenous people. I want to know, what can you do in Congress? You're so well placed there now. What can you do to change the dynamic of this problem at its root and prevent these people from going missing and being murdered?
I worked on the issue of the Violence Against Women Act when I was an advocate and an attorney at Laguna when they were first passing it, the first reauthorization, where they did not want to include Native Americans. We had to push back against mostly Republicans who didn't want to include Native Americans, they didn't want to include lesbians, they didn't want to include immigrant women into the protections of the Violence Against Women Act. So I was really pleased when I was able to get to Congress and move for the latest reauthorization to increase the funding that would be going to address the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples, Indigenous women. And at its core, though, is it's a failure to recognize the jurisdictional problems in Indian country, because tribes cannot prosecute non-Indians who come onto the reservation and commit these heinous crimes against women and other persons, and we do not have enough federal resources dedicated to that. So these perpetrators see it as a ripe area. You can go in, do these horrible things, and then you're not going to get caught. And that's what we have to change, is people realizing that not only you're going to get caught, we are so focused on preventing this that we're putting more resources in there than you've ever seen before. And that's one of the areas that I push, because I understand those unique jurisdictional issues because of my prior work representing tribes and working on jurisdiction issues. That's where it is at its core, is an issue of respecting the tribal ability to go after non-Indians who come in and rape and murder and abduct women and other people from those reservations. Those tribes need to be able to have that ability.
You're going back to your opponent, Sharon Clutchy Shillage. She's a member of the Navajo Nation, which is a big part of the 3rd Congressional District. She comes from a family of cattle ranchers, sheep herders, and she says she will be a better steward of New Mexico's land and water. Why are you the better candidate to advocate for New Mexico's environment and tackle climate change in Washington?
I love this beautiful place we call home. And since I got to Congress, and importantly, before I got to Congress, I have been working to protect the land, air, and water of New Mexico, the places that people hold sacred because of the traditions, the tribal traditions and sacred places, or because we revere as non-tribal people because they are part of who we are. Like the beautiful places that we go when we find solace, that provide the water that is important to us. So I've been doing this my whole life, and it's not words that matter, it's action. And when you look at my record, I've acted to protect Chaco Canyon, to protect areas, to protect our waters from exploitation, to make sure that our waters continue to grow.
Congresswoman Teresa Leger Fernandez, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you so very much.
Thanks to Gwyneth and Representative Leger Fernandez for making the time to speak with us. You can watch their entire 30-minute interview on the New Mexico in Focus YouTube page right now. They touch on several topics, including the recent closure of the San Juan Generating Station, education, and opportunities for doctors and other healthcare workers in northern New Mexico. Again, that's all on the New Mexico in Focus YouTube page and available on the PBS app. Now, next week on our show, we continue our candidate conversations with Representative Leger Fernandez's Republican opponent. That's Sharon Klachi-Shillage, a Navajo former state representative from Farmington. You'll also hear from both candidates for New Mexico's vast 1st Congressional District, incumbent Democrat Melanie Stansbury and Republican challenger Steve Jones. And in our state's most closely contested district, Democrat Gabe Vasquez joins the show to make his pitch to voters in Congressional District 2 as he takes on Republican Yvette Herrell in a rematch from 2022. Now back to our analysis of Project 2025 and Agenda 47, with a focus on how those documents approach specific issues. In this segment, Jeff leads off with an issue of particular importance here in New Mexico: immigration.
Martha, Dee Dee, let's pick it up where we left off. Listed at the top of Agenda 47's platform is this quote: "Seal the border and stop the immigrant invasion." Migrants are mentioned throughout the document as illegal immigrants, with implications of negative impacts in nearly every policy category. That includes draining Medicare, overburdening systems meant for veterans. Dee Dee, how has this type of rhetoric, whether it's in that document or at a Trump rally, shaped the national conversation and the conversation here in New Mexico about immigrants?
Well, I think it's had a very damaging effect, particularly here in New Mexico, where immigration is a part of the fabric of our life here in New Mexico. Almost every family in New Mexico has some connection to immigrants. They may be their fathers, their mothers, their grandfathers, and not just from Mexico, but from other places as well. And in New Mexico, you know, we have 6,000 or so, maybe more dreamers. There is a tremendous economic impact from dreamers, and also from maybe the 60,000 or so undocumented workers here in New Mexico. So there are a lot of these folks in New Mexico. They're contributing to the economy. And so hearing that rhetoric, I think, just strikes fear into their hearts. And with fear into their hearts, it means they're not going to be able to, or they feel they're not able to apply for a driver's license or go to the police in a case of domestic violence, which is really threatens all of our public safety here in New Mexico. So it's having a very damaging effect, in addition to, you know, creating this sort of 1930s atmosphere of enemies without permeating our borders, and we need to arm ourselves and protect ourselves from the aliens and the others. That kind of a mentality is the groundwork for authoritarian rule.
Yikes. And that's leaving aside the notion of people eating pets, right?
Oh, yeah.
I want to get to a couple of statistics really quick. From Pew Research, 6 in 10 voters say immigration is a very important issue to them. That's a 9% increase since the 2020 presidential election and a 13% jump since the 2022 midterms. How will the policies, Martha, that are outlined in Project 2025 play with voters in New Mexico?
Well, one way, and Dee Dee just mentioned it briefly, agriculture here is greatly supported by immigrants. And just on the way here today, I was listening to the radio, and they were talking about if there's, in this state as well as others that depend on immigrants to harvest the food, do the work in the fields, which we know it will greatly affect the food supply and the food supply chain if there's mass deportation. I don't think that they can pull it off to the degree they're claiming, boxcars and using the Navy, for example, but it does suppress people's, if they are illegal or maybe think they might be suspected of being illegal, they're a little less willing to publicly take the job or do some of the work that they've been doing because they fear deportation, whether it would be fair to them or not. And maybe members of their family would be affected, and they know that. And so I think the fear factor is very great with our state as well as other border states. I have friends in Arizona that are agonizing over this in their state as well, and of course Texas. The leadership in Texas is not immigrant friendly either. So
Let's stay on immigration for just a second. I want to talk legality. Agenda 47, which again is the tamer version of the Republican plan, calls for, quote, the largest deportation operation in American history. Project 2025, of course, echoes that sentiment. Can Trump do this? Is it legal?
I don't know whether it's legal or not. I mean, because the word illegal is spread around every chance they get. I do have one thing that they are doing, though, that is quite scary. The policy right now is that immigration agents do not come into so-called protected areas, which are schools, churches, hospitals, to harass and pick people up.
Courthouses, too.
Yeah, and they're going to change that, where they can go anywhere, anytime. And it speaks of Nazis.
Yeah, and I think in the area of immigration, there is more leeway for executive actions than there are, and it's been so hard to get an overall solution through Congress that the presidents have been called upon to do various things. One of the things that I find most frightening about these documents is, in terms of immigration, is the idea that they are moving beyond just so-called illegal immigrants into birthright citizens. Birthright citizens are people who have been born in the United States to folks that came from other countries, and they now are subject to deportation. That is going to have a huge impact in New Mexico. I think it is totally illegal and will be challenged in court, but it's just a fear tactic, yes, I think, that is being used to create fear, to create ill will and division amongst the folks of Hispanic origin themselves, so that they will, be afraid of anybody coming in more recently. And I don't know whether that's working or not, but it's very dangerous.
Yeah, the birthright citizenship part 2 is also undercovered. It's not enough a part of the public discourse. Go ahead, Martha.
Well, here's a direct quote from Project 2025 that is chilling. Project 2025 says it has a call to reinstate, quote, every rule related to immigration that was issued, unquote, during Trump's first term. Mm-hmm. And if it's every rule, then it's going to be every rule and more,
right,
if he gets back in.
And remember, one of those rules was family separation.
Yes.
Let's go to the economy for just a moment. The first chapter of Agenda 47 calls for a cut, unquote, costly and burdensome regulations, end quote. Based on the recommendations from Project 2025, what exact regulations would be cut, and what would that mean for working people in New Mexico and the rest of the country?
Well, this is a common thread throughout the document, and that is to cut back on regulations. It's not surprising. It's a conservative Republican talking point for years. But in this case, it has many dire consequences. For example, cutting back on regulations for PFAS, toxic chemicals, for lead, cutting back on all the regulations that undergird the Clean Air and the Clean Water Act, cutting back on all of the regulations, for example, for Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security that, for example, allow the federal government to negotiate with drug companies, to issue regulations that restrain insurance companies from a lifetime cap on benefits in both Medicaid and Medicare. Those are some of the regulations that that would be affected. I mean, it's an across-the-board thing, so you can't even really enumerate all of the regulations. This is all of the regulations that supplement congressional laws that are made by Congress and signed by the president. This is made more dangerous by the fact that the Supreme Court, under the Chevron decision, has said that the president and Congress don't have to abide by those regulations. And in New Mexico, of course, it's like the methane rule that would prevent the escape of methane gases from old wells and mines. And this would have a very severe impact on public health.
Let's talk about some additional cuts that are outlined in these documents. Agenda 47's plans include closing the Federal Department of Education, and Project 2025 calls for the elimination of Title I, which is meant to provide financial help to high poverty schools. There are hundreds of Title I schools in New Mexico. Martha, what would either of these plans mean for students in schools in New Mexico, and who gets hit hardest?
Well, low-income kids get hit the hardest because they're the most likely to be in the public schools. The majority of kids are in the public schools, but some of them could be moved out by their parents if the income is sufficient. If this stuff, they're going to do away with the Department of Education. It is blatant. They say they're going to close the Department of Education. There will be no more Head Start. There will be no kindergarten and pre-kindergarten that has any kind of federal funding. I have to say, as an aside, another thing in this regulation thing, which we didn't get to, is worker safety. Mm-hmm. There will be no worker safety regulation.
OSHA,
OSHA's gone. Yeah. But in terms of the Department of Education, it's gone too. Mm-hmm. And there's a particular little barb in there for my side of the table, I would say, or ours, and that is reproductive health, because we'll get into that later.
We will.
But in education, they want to push the idea and incentivize. Now, we don't know what incentivize means right now, but incentivize at-home childcare.
Right.
So what is that? I mean, who's going to do that? I don't think the president of Exxon is going to be doing it at home childcare.
I think you're right. That's another yikes moment for the end of this part of the conversation. Mm-hmm. We'll be back here at the table in just a couple to talk about some of the other issues, including abortion rights.
Now to what might be the biggest voting issue nationally and here in our state, abortion. Since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022, the conversation around abortion rights and access has become more nuanced. You've probably heard the term reproductive health care more than ever in the last 2 years. And that's because without the protections that Roe provided, this issue is no longer about an isolated decision to end a pregnancy. Contraception, life-saving health care for expectant mothers, and even the ability for doctors to offer certain treatments during pregnancy complications are all subject to government intervention in 13 states. Here in New Mexico, protections remain in place. Trump has said that he wants states to continue to control abortion laws, but he's wavered on that position numerous times. In March, he said he would call on Congress to pass what he calls a late-term abortion ban, outlawing procedures after 20 weeks. So what's the potential future of bodily autonomy in our state? Here's Jeff for a final segment with Dee Dee Feldman and Martha Burke.
Welcome back, Aditi and Martha. Now, a big part of the uproar around Project 2025 has been its policy prescriptions for abortion rights and access. Agenda 47 is notably quiet on the topic, mentioning it only once, 15 pages in, while referencing Trump's opposition to late-term abortion. This issue has been a rallying cry for Vice President Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party. Meanwhile, the former president has been questioned by reporters for his inconsistent stance. Martha, let's be very, very clear here. What is the GOP position on abortion rights and access?
Eliminate it altogether. No abortion rights whatsoever, anytime, any place. I think it can be captured right here in one of the bullet points. Project 2025 renames the Department of Health and Human Services to the Department of Life. And it has an anti-abortion task force replacing the Reproductive Health Task Force. So what does that mean? Now they are going to report, and that's in there too, they're going to report any woman that has an abortion, goes out of state to have an abortion, or takes up mifepristone, the abortion pills, basically. They'll be reported to law enforcement. They also are going to dismantle, there's something called the EMTLA. It's an emergency treatment for women that are having difficulty, that maybe go into premature labor or that kind of thing. And states and hospitals that get Medicaid funds are mandated to treat that, regardless of what other things may be on the books. If it's a life-threatening thing, they're going to do away with that.
Despite the tap dancing in Agenda 47. Thank you, by the way, for clarifying where they actually stand.
And one of the things that I noticed about the Project 2025 is that they made explicit that abortion is not health care. Health care does not equal abortion. And if it's not health care, what is it? It's a crime.
It's a crime.
It's a crime to be pursued by the criminal justice system.
The Department of Life, Dee, I want to throw this to you. You noticed kind of a theme that permeated through all of Project 2025. The Department of Life kind of speaks to that. Can you unpack for me a little bit like what that was that you noticed?
Yeah, there were two overriding themes I found with Project 2025. The first was a defense of the, and this is a quote, the biblical family. And the biblical family is a family composed of a husband, a wife, and children. Other families are not really included here. And there's particular attention given to the role of the father. And the father's role and requiring in welfare, for example, that the father contribute before any benefits can be given to the family, which is a rather unrealistic proposition. And yet, this is part of the whole idea of the family, and also that in terms of doing away with Head Start. Head Start allows women to work out of the house, and yet the preference in this document is for in-home child care, that's fine, but there's a real cost because who's doing that child care? And it's women, and women's economic contribution is not recognized in that formula. And there's an economic loss in that formula too. And the other theme that I noticed here was this document, Project 2025, is really righting past wrongs. It's a document that constantly refers to the past. It constantly, in terms of criminal justice and other, in the Department of Justice, talks about the weaponization of the Justice Department under the Biden administration, and how that would be counteracted by further weaponization of the Justice Department but in the opposite direction.
Hunter Biden's laptop makes some, it does feel like that, right? It's sort of a document of grievance. But I want to return a little bit to the idea of this sort of biblical family thing. In New Mexico, we think of ourselves, because we are, as a place that has strong protections for abortion rights and access, strong protections for LGBTQ folks, protections for transgender folks. What does Project 2025 mean specifically for New Mexico when it comes to those kinds of protections?
Well, it means all of those protections are under fire, if not on track to be eliminated. And there are a couple of things back to the reproduction, but it gets to the heart of what you're saying. They are going to create a new position called Special Representative for Domestic Women's Health to lead anti-abortion policy in every agency of the U.S. federal government. What is to stop them from bringing that right down to the state, have one in every state? Advocates they're going to hire people to enforce mandated reporting of abortions, miscarriage, or stillbirth. So if you're a woman that has undergone any of that, you're a criminal now. And so the implications for our state, because we are a pro-abortion state, and I say the term proudly, we do care about women's health, we'll be under target quite a bit more than, say, a state like Texas, which is already well down the road to doing these things on its own. So states like ours are going to be really under fire here.
And one thing, the common idea is that, well, we have New Mexico, we're protected here, we don't have to worry about that, we have good state laws, good state policies. But one of the things that they mention in Project 2025 is that federal funding can be used to punish state programs that provide abortions or that don't, or that teach critical race theory in schools. Then federal funds can be withdrawn or curtailed.
And Medicaid is one of those federal funds that is, we're very dependent in this state on Medicaid because we are a low-income state.
Yeah.
And that will have huge implications.
Let's talk about what Project 2025 says and prescribes when it comes to environmental policy and climate change kind of more broadly. Dee Dee, what stuck out to you on that front as you ran through the document?
Well, it's just, as we said earlier, it's just filling in the blanks for drill, baby, drill. And it talks about how, there will be unrestrained oil and gas and fracking and drilling. And there will be no EPA there to even clean up the results. We just had a report this week about how the EPA was cleaning up uranium mines over in the Grants area. Well, the EPA will be really hamstrung, if not destroyed, by the policies in Project 2025. And it goes beyond hamstringing the EPA, unleashing the oil and gas. He basically, or the Project 2025 wants to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. And the Inflation Reduction Act in New Mexico has had, I think, $15 billion worth of benefits, not just in terms of building roads and bridges, but also in terms of stimulus for the Rural Transmission Authority, for converting rural electric co-ops to solar, to allowing consumers to buy EVs or energy efficient appliances. All of that would be done away with if the recommendations of Project 2025 were followed. And that would not only have a big impact on climate, but it would also have a big economic impact here in New Mexico. So I think there was a study somewhere in preparing for this program that I came across that actually said it was out of Great Britain, that said if all of the economic policies in 2025 would be adopted, it would put us back in terms of global warming 5 or 6 years. It would undo all of the Biden advances, and then would, of course, not just undo it, but then going forward would allow unconstrained emissions from oil and gas.
Well, to follow up, I mean, what you've just outlined is basically an outline for doing away with the EPA altogether. I mean, it's another, let's dismantle the structure, the basic building blocks of government in the form of regulations and safety and all of that sort of thing. The EPA will be gone.
Well, not only the EPA, but the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Research Administration will be gone. The weather organization, which is under that, will be gone too. And that's explicit. That's explicit in 2025. And I think what that also betrays is a distrust of science, a distrust of I mean, it was the scientists who were making all these regulations, these horrible regulations that are now to be dismissed. And it's politicians now appointed here by the executive, and the executive only, not the civil service, that will be deciding matters of science.
We don't need the National Academies of Science anymore. We'll have Trump.
Yeah.
Martha, I'm going to give you the last minute here. We've mentioned entitlement programs a couple of times at the table here today. That's one difference between Agenda 47 and Project 2025. 2025 proposes to essentially gut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Agenda 47 says Trump would leave the retirement age the same and he wouldn't mess with Medicare. What should people in New Mexico believe in terms of how a second Trump administration would approach that?
Well, first of all, it's a big lie. We know that Trump wants to, I don't know whether Trump wants to dismantle the government or he's just too lazy to go against the Heritage Foundation and others that do. He seems to, right now, be enamored with swaying to the music. So we don't know. But I think basically our mantra has to be trust but verify, or just don't trust it at all.
We're going to have to leave it there. Martha Burke, Dee Dee Feldman, thank you both so much for having what has been a very scary conversation today.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Dee Dee Feldman, Martha Burke, and thanks to everyone else who contributed to the show. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus is provided by viewers like you.